It's time to flail these tomatoes. Even though there are a large number of green tomatoes in there, I will glean off anything that's ripe or could be put in a window. But it's time to flail this down. I'm Justin Hitt from Prosperity Homestead, here working at the Sustainable Homestead Institute. And you can see how the area that I flailed last week or earlier this week is coming back a little bit. But this area is tremendously overgrown. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take out all these metal stakes. And these are just, we're holding the tomatoes up. Now, if you have a permanent structure in here, this method may not work as well because you'd have to flail around the permanent structure. So our design has to be a little bit different. Our design has to be more level. And that way we can flail both sides of the trellis to get the plants, to break them down into soil and to return that surplus, or use wooden stakes. Now, what I like about wooden stakes is that I could just flail mow over those stakes. Now, this area right here actually has potatoes in it as well, but I think I'm going to hit it anyway because the potatoes are not too obvious. But these wooden stakes that are in here, I can just knock them over with the flail mower, and after first pass, I can come in and pick them up. But a metal stake will bend. The wooden stakes are reusable as long as I'm knocking them over and flailing around them. But the metal stakes are not reusable, and they will get chopped all the hell up and be useless. See, the flail mower itself can flail down all this tall area, including sticks. As long as it can bend it over, it can chop it up. So, but what we're doing here again is we're taking out the hoses. Those large towers have hoses connected to them. We're taking out the any obstacles, and then we're going to flail mow it to give us a nice little path like this. And you can see how the flail mower leaves behind all of this brush, this biomass. Now I'm flailing at one of the highest settings just to knock everything down. I will come back at a much lower setting and flail it again to see if I can't get near to the soil so that I can then put a cover crop in behind it. But we may still have to do a shallow tillage to terminate. Now remember, this is where the wildflowers are, so we're not going to shallow till there. We want the wildflowers to come back. Now, what can you do other than shallow tillage? Well, we can introduce a large amount of biomass. So we're making biomass on the surface. We're putting cover crop in place to make even more biomass. But if we introduce biomass that can, like straw or used hay or wood chips, we can actually help mat the soil down to protect the soil, but also to break down the root system. Another thing we can do is adjust the design so that it's more accessible by mower or flail. So you can see how beautiful this path is. And that's because a lawnmower can just come right down it. But if we could go through and flail these beds with shorter crops, then flail the bed, and then plant that next crop in, and then flail the bed, we could have a faster cycle to take the biomass and put it in the soil. And in fact, if I mowed this every time it got knee high, it would produce more biomass than it would allowing it to grow tall. The challenge is when you have plants, you want to make sure you're mulching heavily around those plants so that we can flail around the plants instead of accidentally cutting the plants down. So like this area over here, I'm gonna glean it again, take more tomatoes out of it. There's some basil on the other side over there, but it would be best if I could take that flail mower right up next to it and keep those paths nice and mowed, almost down to this level where it's just a little bit of grass and a lot of clover, and then that biomass raked onto the beds. Because again, heavy mulching, like I talked about in my grass-fed garden video, very popular video, layers and layers of this mulch will actually prevent new weed seeds from coming back, new plants from sprouting, and in fact will build that soil up. Now we have these vegetative strips in here as well. Those are not easy to flail mow. They have to either be string trimmed or cut with a scythe, and those can be cut into mulch and put around the beds. And like I've shown you in previous videos, if you get the right amount of mulch here, you're going to be feeding the soil. You can see the soil down here starting to get more. It's a darker color, less red, but you can feed the soil the microbes in the soil will break down those materials, and you won't have to haul in as much materials. But if you want to shortcut this, you keep your vegetative strips, you keep them cut. Everything you cut off your vegetative strips becomes mulch around the plants you want to keep, and then you allow paths that are wide enough to come in and flail the rest of the stuff. Now remember, we're not coming in here with herbicides or different kinds of chemicals. We are literally flailing the beds, and this is a really good example here. And this one turned out better because it's flat. But I flail the beds at maximum height, and you can see very little grew back. We do have a little bit that grew back down here. But ultimately what happens is this cover, this mulch, mats down on the soil and basically keeps the sunlight off of the previous plants, because remember, the roots are still down there. Keeps the sunlight off of them and will not allow them to photosynthesize nor grow. So this area here, when I hit it with the lowest setting of the flail mower, now of course I'm going to flail mow everything else first, and it's a lot of work because I let it grow too long. But if I flail everything else first, it'll be down like this path here, and then I come back in with the lowest setting, which is about 1/4 inch, cut it again. It'll mix up the mulch on the surface. It'll give us a nice thick layer of mulch. And then the only thing that will grow back is this hairy vetch. I know that the areas are doing well if the majority of what grows back is hairy vetch. Hairy vetch is a nitrogen fixing plant, and it's really easy once it's growing to scythe it, but it tends to block out everything underneath it. So if we cut that hairy vetch, mulch the plants with it, if we continue to flail the beds between each season, if we adjust our terraces to make them easier and more accessible, over time, we're going to have an incredible production. Now, we're not having bad production right now. I just noticed something, and I'm walking across the beds here. There are, and I'll get these before I flail them, but there are green peppers out here. There are tomatoes out here. There are other plants growing on out here. So, you know, that makes it take a little longer because you have to go through all this mess to find things. I know there's onions up front. You can start seeing some of the grading between the different beds, the different colors of the beds. And I can definitely feel on my feet different thicknesses of soil. And these beds are definitely softer in some places than others. But again, this is a cycle. Now, we are mimicking nature. This could be impounded animals that come through here and mat down all the materials and stomp down all the grass and eat up the food they want and then crap out the food that they didn't digest. This could be wildfire, because of course we discussed the idea, but we really don't want to start a fire out in the middle of here because it's not the most productive. But there are natural systems where wildfires will cut down the brush and allow a new crop to grow. We're using the flail mower because that's the mechanical means that we have. But again, if we were a little bit more on top of it, if I got out here and scythed on a regular basis, we could be scything out fodder to mulch around the plants or to feed to animals so that we can turn this over. Do you understand the concept? Is this making sense to you? We are growing our soil. Oh, there's habaneros in there. We're growing our soil with what grows. So basically, if a weed grows, that is the most ideal plant for the soil conditions and the climate. Okay, now we can change the soil conditions so more veg grows, like this. But in order to get there, in our case, starting with clay, Virginia clay, we're using a wild grassland. We're using wildflowers and cover crops. We're using a little bit of everything because we want to get that seed bank grown out in the soil itself. I know, folks, it looks like a massive mess. Be sure you ask your questions in the comments. But with the right equipment, which could be a lawnmower if the grass was lower, a flail mower with the grass getting about waist high, or a bush hog with the grass getting higher than that, as long as there's no woody trees in there, you can turn that grass into productive soil. Again, this soil just a few years ago was red clay. very compact, hard to work with. Now, fortunately, the Virginia's largest hugelkultur used to be here a couple more years before that. So there were things done to soak in the water, spread and soak in the water. There were things done like these terraces that were helping to spread and soak the water and spread and soak nutrients as we added animal manures to the soil. Now we're letting the garden grow out between seasons and then using the flail mower to build up that biomass on the surface of the soil to build a thick mulch layer in order to prevent the weeds from coming back. Is it a perfect solution? No. Is it the best solution for the resources and the time and the people we have involved here? Yes. Does it produce food? See, that's the big question everybody has. Does it produce food? Yes, it definitely produces food. It also creates protective habitat for trees. We're finding a lot of persimmon trees. We got a little food forest going on over there. It provides habitat for small birds and other creatures that are out here working with us. There are voles and moles in here as well that are help turn up that soil. And then again, we have tons and tons of sequestered carbon. That is, from the atmosphere. The carbon in the atmosphere is where these weeds came from. They are sprouting because the soil conditions are right for that weed. They're sprouting because the climate conditions are right for that weed. They're sequestering carbon from the atmosphere. We come through and chop it and drop it on the soil. Now again, you could have animals come through and doing this, but you wouldn't want a bunch of goats through your nightshade plants and eating on your tomatoes, because it'll give them a taste for tomatoes, but it could also upset their stomach. You might have chickens in here, but you don't want chickens in tall grass. So again, we flail it, we scythe it, we take those materials and we mound them on the beds, which is composting in place. So we're building up that compost on the surface, we're feeding the soil biology, and ultimately getting good results. Now, I'm not getting any results talking to you guys on the YouTubes. So what I'm going to do is get back to work. And by the way, there's no ticks out here. I don't end up with ticks walking around in this stuff. It's not that hard to walk around, but it is full of abundance. So I'm going to get a bigger basket. I'm going to pull these hoses out of here. I'm going to get these sticks out of here. And I'm going to get this project done and show you what it looks like when it's done. So stay tuned and thanks for subscribing to the Prosperity Homestead podcast. If you're not a subscriber, be sure to like and subscribe. And I'll see you in the next episode.